You are listening to the Sports Bar and talkSPORT. Me, Jamie O'Hara and Dean Saunders. We're taking you through till 1 a.m. We've got a bit of a triv coming up at midnight, but let's get an update on the transfer window. talkSPORT Bet.
Bring it on with talkSPORT Bet. Download the app or visit talksportbet.com for all the latest odds and offers. 18 plus, gambleaware.org.
Ben Jacobs joins us. Right, Ben?
Hi, Ben.
Good evening, guys.
How are you, Ben? You good?
Yeah, everything good. You?
Yeah, all right. Well, look, yesterday I spoke to you about, obviously, Infantino and the FIFA thing, but didn't get a chance to talk about transfers. So let's do that first. Bruno Guimarães. How far away are Arsenal from this deal happening?
I think Arsenal have grown in optimism. Newcastle still deny a formal bid, but remember with Christos Solis, Arsenal got a verbal agreement and then thereafter only placed the formal bid once they'd come to an understanding. There's 2 points. One is within Newcastle, Eddie Howe is refusing to guarantee that Guimaraes will stay. And yet, if he returns on Friday, which is the expectation at the moment to pre-season, he's not going to do what Alexander Isak did and go on strike or anything like that. Some of it may be down to Newcastle also lining up a replacement, but Arsenal feel that anything above 75 million will stand a chance. Newcastle United sources point towards a number closer to 85 million, but with talks ongoing, Arsenal still consider Guimaraes their leading target, and I think there's a fair chance that we get clarity by Friday or shortly after, I should say, because both Newcastle United and Arsenal don't want this to drag on. Newcastle, because the last thing Eddie Howe wants is the season to start, and we're still talking about Guimaraes' future. And from Arsenal's perspective, if they can't get the player quickly, they'll need to move on to other targets.
Okay.
Next one on the list, Bradley Barcola. Obviously, Arsenal and Liverpool are locked in a battle for his signature, but please tell me the fee is not 145 million.
No, that's the PSG starting point. Remember, though, Newcastle wanted 150 for Alexander Isak and Liverpool paid 125. It's quite normal for a seller in this inflated market to have that high valuation, but it doesn't mean that's what the player's going to go for. And although PSG can point to a back-to-back Champions League winner, someone that had a very strong World Cup, and other factors like his talent and his age and the demand, Liverpool are looking at two things. One, he's got 2 years left on his contract. Two, they made an inquiry last summer and were quoted about £75 million or 85 million euros. So Liverpool naturally will say to PSG, you already told us the price a year ago. There's 1 year left. Player's not going to sign a new deal. He wants out. And all of that means Liverpool's starting point is lower. My information is that 85 million or give or take 100 million euros will be the starting point, and we can say when rather than if Liverpool place a bid. PSG obviously with a higher number, but are they going to come to some kind of middle ground in and around Elliot Anderson, Morgan Rogers territory, maybe even a little bit less as far as Liverpool are concerned. So there is optimism that this deal is possible, and now we just need to wait and see when Liverpool test the water whether PSG responds saying 145 or actually privately there's another more realistic number. And if there is, this is a deal that actually could get done quite quickly. If there isn't, Liverpool will do what they did with Isak. They'll bid once, they'll walk away, they'll let some of the window tick down and maybe come back towards the end of the month knowing that there'll be more urgency to resolve the situation. So ball is kind of in PSG's court. Liverpool want to do a deal at a reasonable number in an inflated market. That's still a ton of money for PSG given the player's contractual situation. If PSG don't want to play ball, then Liverpool will play a patient game, and I feel there's a realistic chance here that this deal gets done.
Okay. What about Vinícius Jr? Because obviously there's been loads of talk about him with Arsenal and his contract. Apparently he's skipped training. Is that true?
I'm not sure about that because the players have obviously had different kind of World Cup breaks and things like that, and Real Madrid are seeking to get clarity either this week or by early next week. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors here about what the player's doing, what the club's doing. We heard reports yesterday saying that Real Madrid weren't going to sell even if he doesn't sign a new deal. My understanding is that behind the scenes, the players' agency, the same as Jan Diamande's, are working towards two proposals. One is to see whether they can align with Real Madrid. The other is exploring the market with Arsenal also a viable destination. And I don't think we're going to see a scenario, personally speaking to sources, where Real Madrid chance this and allow the possibility of just keeping the player without a new deal. And herein lie the games, because on that left-hand side, Diomande can play there. Mbappe is arguably at his most effective on the left. So Real can say to Vinny Jr, you sign, or there's a danger you fall down the pecking order. And if you don't sign, we're going to seek to sell you. Door becomes open to Arsenal. At the same point, as Arsenal explore this, it's leverage, and the player may end up getting the terms eventually that he wants, because Real's preference is to keep Vinny Jr, but it has to be on their financial terms. Now there's leverage. Are Real going to go up and flinch first and get a deal done on Vinny Jr.'s terms, or are Real going to stick to their position, in which case they may be forced to sell because they don't want to lose the player on a free transfer next summer? So all of this makes it an incredibly complicated saga, and we may get clarity in the next few days, because Real are trying to get to the end of this week or early next week and have a definitive answer. Is he going to extend? And if not, it's game on for Arsenal.
Okay. Dino?
So we got Alex Scott at Bournemouth. Man United look as if they're jumped ahead of the queue with Chelsea right behind them. What's the situation there?
I'm not sure there is a queue, because Bournemouth don't want to sell, and my understanding is that position is quite genuine. Manchester United have got no plans to bid 80 to 100 million on Alex Scott, and there's not much else you can do, because Chelsea have already had a £64 million bid rejected. Suggestions from earlier in the window that 60 million would cut it, clearly not the case, because 64 got turned away. So the starting point for anyone that now bids for Alex Scott might be 70, and even that I don't think will stand a chance of engagement. Alex Scott doesn't want to sign a new deal now, which would suggest that we might get more suitors and interest as the month of August kicks in. But remember, not signing a new deal now doesn't mean not signing a new deal at all, because if Bournemouth hold their nerve, and with European football, why shouldn't they, then once the window shuts, Scott will see it in his best interest to likely engage again, because Bournemouth are not saying sign and you're stuck here. They're saying sign and we'll let you go anyway in 2027. So as soon as the window shuts, if a sale doesn't happen, Scott can get short-term improved terms, a release clause likely at market value, and everyone wins in the short term, which is why Bournemouth are calm about the situation, because Scott not wanting to sign now doesn't necessarily mean in 5-6 weeks' time when the window shuts, he won't change his position. So it's actually all quiet on the Scott front. Yeah, Manchester United like the player, but I'd be surprised if they go in excess of 80 million, and that's possibly the only way of starting a meaningful conversation.
Okay. Jordan Henderson, he's left Brentford. They come to a conclusion that he could go for nothing. Chelsea look like they're going to get him over the line, right?
Yeah, this one is almost a done deal. It's agreed in principle between Chelsea and Jordan Henderson, even though he had other offers. The first step was, as you say, terminating the Brentford contract. This was a long-standing agreement that when Henderson went into the final year of his Brentford deal, he would have the opportunity to leave due to a verbal agreement driven by the owner, Matthew Benham, and a classy gesture, because at the same time as this deal has almost come to fruition, Danny Welbeck's moved to Chelsea subject to medical formalities, 2-year contract, and Brighton have got a fee. So Brentford could have got something out of Chelsea, but they respected their pre-existing agreement with Henderson. It's not a formal clause, it was only a gentleman's agreement, and they allowed him to mutually terminate, and now Chelsea are expected to complete that one on a 2-year contract.
Okay, look, Ben, I've got to ask you, obviously you are in the know in terms of the situation with FIFA and UEFA. What is the latest now? Because we're hearing all sorts of stories. So where's this going to end up?
So Gianni Infantino has come out through official media channels and stated that this is not an obligation for the 211 member associations. It's a consultation process, it's an option, and it's a vote. But he's put the consultation period at 53 days arbitrarily. So the member federations have to decide now by the 19th of September whether they want this new subsidiary. And of course, to many, it's appealing because Infantino has offered them 2 payments of $20 million US, basically as a joining fee, although dressed up as development money, and it's so much higher than the current 8 million that the federations are due in US dollars in the current funding cycle. The feeling is, with it only being a majority vote, Infantino is in a very strong position. Yet to counter that, the other development is UEFA tomorrow will hold an emergency meeting as they try and get unity and clarity as to what the next steps are. CONCACAF have spoken out as well. But what's intriguing is some of the supporters, federation-wise or confederation-wise, have not criticised the proposal. They've just said they need more time to assess it, which will give Infantino confidence. But tomorrow UEFA are going to decide what they can do. One is to collectively oppose it, but the Czech Republic have already broken ranks and said they're in favour of it. Two is going to be to boycott FIFA tournaments, starting maybe with the Women's World Cup and extending to the Centenary Men's World Cup in 2030. But that sounds like a threat, and it's so far away, it remains to be seen if that's a practical reality, or, as we've reported before, UEFA would have to find a viable candidate in order to stand against Gianni Infantino at the next election, meaning anything that happens between now and then could in theory be undone. But the challenge is, if this proposal gets to the point of a vote, or if the FIFA election gets to the point of Infantino being unopposed or having a kind of stalking horse candidate that doesn't stand a viable chance of beating him, there's nothing UEFA can do because they've only got 55 votes out of 211, which means practically UEFA's tactic has to be to cause enough uproar to stop this getting to a vote. Otherwise, it's likely that Infantino will pass this, will corporatize FIFA, and ultimately will be re-elected in March as FIFA president by a landslide, with or without an opponent against him.
It's hard for me to understand because it's just not something I would know about. But why is he doing it? What is the end goal for him to make this move? What is he trying to see in the future for, the FIFA World Cup and how what is it?
Well, you don't need to be a rocket scientist. You just need to understand one word, money, but then it's about where the money goes. So Gianni Infantino will stress FIFA's not for profit. All the money gets reinvested. Everyone makes more money. And his aim is to align FIFA's commercial and operational arms to give the member federations a stake, for FIFA to control this new subsidiary, but 20% to go to private equity, which adds extra funding to the tune of $4.2 billion US. Now that number is significant because when you look at other valuations, 20% of a new FIFA subsidiary at 4.2 billion seems relatively low, and anyone investing from the private sector could make a lot of money very quickly if that's the entry point. So one question is who's funding it and what do they have to gain? And then, of course, the critics of Gianni Infantino will say it's self-serving, it's Infantino giving himself life after FIFA because he can only stand for one more term. But if he's commissioner of this new subsidiary, he might be able to do that indefinitely. And Gianni Infantino's salary is believed to be in the region of $6 million US. And if you look at other commissioners in other sports, some of them are earning 30, 40, 50, 60 million.
Right.
So it would allow Gianni Infantino to have a long-term payday and security of tenure. And some believe that that's his end game.
It feels like he's trying to make all the nations in the world like the NFL. That's what it is. That what like he's trying to create something where the FIFA World Cup final ends up being like the Super Bowl and he's the commissioner of it all, right? That's what it feels like.
Also, he's trying to put football at the top table of politics, of entertainment, of culture.
But it already is. It already is.
You would say that. And it's true in the broader sense, but in a practical sense, if you think of tournaments, adding hydration breaks, adding extended halftime shows, raising ticket prices, bigger stadiums, expanded teams, all of these are seen as new scope. So you're right in the sense, if you look at the digital space, if you look at the culture of football, it's always had that intersect. But then the practical reality of how FIFA cashes in on that has never been there. And Infantino's prepared to take football and the practical on-field product and add dressings and add different things from different sectors, which we see anyway in American sport. He would argue it's not a bad thing because you suddenly can have a halftime show that makes as much as the football itself. But to the football sentimentalist, this is a threat to the very soul of the game.
Yeah, the football's for the fans, right? It ain't about Super Bowls and halftime shows and all this absolute garbage we don't need. It's just absolute bonkers.